Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Now, I should explain, when I put up these videos, I do it the day before. So I'm saying it's Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Well, this video is probably going to go up at around 11 a.m. midday Pacific time on the day before. Now, the reason I do that is because my audience comes from around the world. And that means, there are people in Australia or New Zealand watching this video. So when I put up this video at, say, midday on Tuesday, that means that it's sort of early evening in Europe, and it's the next day in Australia. And so I try to consider the fact that there is a global audience. Okay, it's not a huge audience. I don't have that many subscribers. Maybe I'm flattering myself there. But that might mean that might be why it seems a bit strange for me to be talking about a day which hasn't happened yet. But it is because I'm trying to consider everyone around the world, and I can't do three videos. I mean, it would be nice to do three videos, to have an American version and a European version and a Australasian version. That would be really good, but it would, I'm afraid, be really time consuming. So having got that out of the way, my topic today is going to be Jupiter, because Jupiter very soon will be moving into Gemini, and it moves into Gemini London time at 0:15 a.m. on Sunday. So if you're in the Americas, it moves into Jupiter. Jupiter moves into Gemini late on Saturday. And I want to consider, firstly, what this means for Jupiter going into Gemini. How is the world going to change? What can we expect with Jupiter moving into Gemini? And I also want to consider a few famous people who do have their Jupiters in Gemini. It's not quite the same as, say, having Mars in Gemini or Venus in Gemini, because Jupiter is a generational planet to an extent. It stays in a sign, all things being equal, for about a year, but it can move through a sign much faster than that, and there is retrogrades to consider, so it can sometimes goes into a sign, then comes out of a sign, then goes back into the sign. But for example, if you remember to your school days, and the people in your class, half the class probably had Jupiter in the same sign, maybe the whole class, because at school you're with people who are your age group, and so it might have been very difficult to work out what it means for Jupiter to be in a particular sign and what makes it special. I've got Jupiter in Pisces. I suppose that means when I was at school, most people in my class, when I was a child, also had Jupiter in Pisces. So that doesn't mean to say that everyone in that had a Jupiter in Pisces feel to them. I don't really think so. And maybe it's more useful to think about famous people. Famous people often have exaggerated lives. And so when people have exaggerated lives, the power of that Jupiter in Gemini can become more apparent, like the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who has Jupiter in Gemini, or Steve McQueen, or Robert Kennedy Jr. has Jupiter in Gemini. So I will be looking at a few people with Jupiter in Gemini. I hope, of course, unless I run out of time, but I think that should be okay. So before I do all that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Top right, that's a picture of Jupiter. Just a reminder that things are going on with Jupiter, at least from the Earth's perspective. Of course, from Jupiter's perspective, Jupiter probably couldn't care less what's going on Earth. It's a bit of a one-way process. Okay, so we can see that the moon is still in Scorpio. Moon is in Scorpio all day. The moon has is out of the via combuster, or is certainly leaving the via combuster, depending on your time zone. And with the moon in Scorpio, there is still a strong emphasis on the way we feel and how people are expressing their feelings. And I'm thinking that there could be a certain amount of emotional hoarding, keeping things to ourselves. We don't want to always express our feelings because we don't know what's going to happen if we do that. We might be a little bit concerned about the consequences of keeping our feelings to ourselves. We might be concerned about the consequences of revealing our feelings. Just never quite know how people are going to respond, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't have powerful feelings. So that's one thing going on. And that moon in Scorpio is making a couple of aspects. It is making a trine to Saturn and an opposition to Uranus. So moon trine Saturn can be about trying to ground one's feelings. We can have strong feelings. These feelings might be a little bit difficult, but with Saturn, we can perhaps stabilize them, and we're going to find ways of controlling our feelings, but possibly in quite a gentle way. Remember, it's a trine between the moon and Saturn, not a square or an opposition. But where we do have an opposition is between the moon and Uranus. So moon opposition Uranus can be about tension and anger even. And it's in fixed signs. Moon is in Scorpio. Scorpio is a fixed sign. Uranus is in Taurus, a fixed sign. So that can be about powerful feelings getting stronger and getting a bit angry, because moon opposition Uranus can be about anger. And we're trying hard to keep it to ourselves. We're trying to keep a lid on things. But there could be sudden explosions if we don't watch out. So perhaps what we have to do is maybe focus on that moon trine Saturn. We've got feelings. We have to express these feelings in a way that is not destructive. And perhaps Saturn is going to help us do that. And while this is going on, Venus is moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. And this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter is exact tomorrow. But I think we're really starting to feel it now. And this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it could be a little bit indulgent. It's in Taurus, after all. And Taurus likes the good things in life. And Venus and Jupiter are the two benefics. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is the lesser benefic. So when you put Venus and Jupiter together as a conjunction, all things being equal, that should be fortunate, though we shouldn't forget that this aspect, this conjunction, does take place in the last degree of Taurus, and things taking place in the last degree of a sign can often work out in a somewhat weird way. And Venus and Jupiter conjunction, yes, it can be generous, certainly can be generous. It can be lucky, but it can be just excessive in a fairly neutral way. And we could direct our attentions and our affections in ways that are perhaps quite extreme. Remember, Venus and Jupiter are in Taurus. So maybe some of us have to be a little careful with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, but all things being equal, I would have said that it was fortunate, though we also shouldn't forget that later in the day and into tomorrow, the moon in Scorpio will be making an opposition to that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And so with that opposition to Venus-Jupiter in conjunction, there's plenty of scope there for really quite excessive behavior. Another aspect to consider is the Sun trine Pluto. The Sun is exactly trine Pluto. It's a fairly gentle aspect of trine. You know, it's not dynamic. And I may get some criticism here, but I actually think it's quite a weak aspect. As you know, I do not feel that trines are in the same league as conjunctions, squares, even semi-squares and sesquiquadrates, at least in terms of generally what's happening in the world and in personal astrology, particularly when it's a trine to Pluto. And so we should not get too excited about that sun trine Pluto, but still, in a gentle way, many of us can create some transformation. We can create change, and because it's a trine, it may be easier than expected to create change. So if we think that something needs to be completely changed, we maybe don't need to make a big sort of exhibition of ourselves in the process of trying to turn everything upside down. It may be easier than we think, you know, especially as the Sun is trining Pluto at the same time as the Moon is opposition Uranus. That is somewhat dynamic, and so if there's something we don't like, perhaps we shouldn't make a big fuss about it. We should just quietly change it. No need to have a fight, no need to have an argument, just to sort of gently impose our will on the situation. And I suppose if no one knows what's going on, then all the better, because that means that we can quietly get our way. There are a couple of midpoints of note. Venus and Jupiter. So we're thinking about Venus and Jupiter, and I've just said that these two planets as a conjunction is fortunate. And you might think it's very sociable, Venus and Jupiter. Venus is the planet of relationships. But the problem is that Venus and Jupiter, as they form a conjunction, are semi-square the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So you see, there's Mercury, there's Saturn. So the Mercury-Saturn midpoint is around 13 Aries. And so that means that Venus and Jupiter are going to be semi-square. They're going to be semi-square the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So you're going to have Venus semi-square the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, and you're going to have Jupiter semi-square the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. And the Mercury-Saturn pair, which I think has come up quite recently, is often about endings. Not dramatic endings, but just deciding that something has come to an end, that perhaps our relationships with another person have come to an end, in a gentle kind of way. But with both Venus and Jupiter on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, semi-square the Venus-Saturn midpoint, it may be actually about changes in our social environment, and we might come to the conclusion that certain people have fulfilled their useful purpose and we just don't need to have them around anymore. Or we might feel that we need to loosen ties with them. Now, I'm probably not talking about long-term close relationships, but just more people that you have been with for a long time. And that may be that the way it's working is that the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is looking for good, healthy, profitable relationships, but it may be you have to consider what is actually stopping you having good, healthy, and profitable relationships. It may be existing relationships which are cluttering the channel. So if old relationships that are no longer doing you any good are cluttering the channel and are preventing you finding new relationships, then obviously the channel has to be cleared out. And maybe certain people who are no longer useful, you need to distance yourself from them. So we can't see Venus-Jupiter as being completely warm, cuddly, friendly, no tension. There may be something that has to be done first before we can fully benefit from the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, especially as the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is taking place in the last degree of Taurus. That does indicate something coming to an end. Both these planets are about to change sign. Both of them are about to move into Gemini. And now I just want to consider things from the perspective of the heliocentric solar system. Again, I'm not, as I sort of said yesterday, I'm not saying anything wonderful is happening from a heliocentric perspective. I just want to look at what's going on, see if there's anything particularly interesting. And from a heliocentric perspective, we notice a conjunction between Venus and Uranus. And that conjunction between Venus and Uranus, which from a geocentric perspective, we've already had it, but from a heliocentric perspective, it happens today. And maybe it links with what I was just saying regarding the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. It may be about having to consider changes in relationships. If you want someone new to come into your life, then someone from the past perhaps has to be removed. Or, okay, that's a bit dramatic, but you have to distance yourself from them. And there could be sudden events as far as relationships are concerned. Also, we mustn't forget that Venus doesn't just rule relationships, it also rules money. So with Venus-Uranus conjunction, heliocentric conjunction, there may be financial issues that suddenly crop up and they require our attention. But it may be more about what's going on in society, because I do think that is one aspect of what what the heliocentric chart is telling us about. It's very impersonal, and so there may be a sense in which the world is changing, relations in the world are changing, maybe relations between countries are changing, and countries, societies can fall out with each other. They can get close to each other. But there is a certain sense of excitement, and it's made stronger by the fact that Mercury is still in a square aspect to Venus and Uranus. Okay, it is moving away a little, but it's still quite close. So we've got Mercury square Uranus, Mercury square Venus from a heliocentric perspective. And, with that square, we can't really expect relationships to stay the same. And the things people say, Mercury is about communication, the things people say can cause a fair amount of change. Anyway, that's the heliocentric position, and I now want to turn to my forecasts for the 12 signs and switch back to the geocentric view. And these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Aries, you are possibly not a typical Aries today. Aries is supposed to be quite an impulsive sign, likes to just act first, think later, and you want to steer clear of complications. Complications will hold you back, particularly emotional complications. But today, from your perspective, things are a little complicated. You can understand other people's issues. So in a sense, you have a good psychological insight into what's going on around you. But through this insight, you realize that people just aren't being straightforward. And it just may be difficult to get things done in a direct, open way. That's the way you like to function. And that means if you feel that things just are a bit slow, or you're feeling frustrated, you shouldn't really take it out on other people in most cases. I think you should just accept that this is about you. You do change over the course of a month. For example, as the moon moves through the different signs, there'll be different faces of Aries, and right now we're seeing perhaps a more intense face of Aries, and that's the way you are right now. Still, I think that there's a chance that you do get angry. After all, the moon in Scorpio is making an opposition to Uranus. There could be things that annoy you. And I think if you do find yourself getting annoyed, I think it's just because of sheer frustration. So that goes back to what I was saying. You should not blame other people. And it may also feel that your vision is on ice. You have a vision, or at least you should be having a vision. There's nothing wrong with having a vision. You want things to happen in a particular way, and you like to be optimistic. But this vision is just not working out. It's just on hold. And again, that's another reason why you're feeling annoyed. But from a positive perspective, I think what's happening is that you just need to think it through. I mean, remember, Mars is in Aries, and Mars is your ruling planet. So Mars is well placed in Aries. It's not like you're weak or powerless. It's not like that. It's just that you're at a stage where you do need to work out what's going on. And you can't be up there on the surface being seen and heard all the time. And there are perhaps some deeper issues which you need to address yourself to. They could be annoying, and you might just feel that it's a real pain that things are so complicated, but that's the way it is. And Aries, if you can address yourself to these complications with a good heart, then I think that you will be well rewarded. Now, I should say something about relationships, because Venus is the ruler of your opposite sign of Libra, and Venus is moving to a conjunction of Jupiter. And this Venus conjunct Jupiter may indicate that the people close to you have high expectations. May not feel like it, but there are things they want, and they do want things to be better. And perhaps you need to try to work out what's going on through their heads, why they want things to be better. And can you make things better for them? Okay, maybe not today, but you can at least try to use your intuition and your sensitivity to work out what exactly they want. And from a heliocentric perspective, Venus is making a conjunction to Uranus, and Venus is ruler of your opposite sign. So it may be, if you want drama today, maybe it's not you providing the drama. Venus conjunct Uranus may be someone else providing the drama. People could be quick to change their minds, could be quick to appear and quick to disappear. And so if people start behaving in a way that appears a bit unstable and unpredictable, don't worry about it. what you're seeing is people expressing their autonomy and their freedom. And I think, Aries, that is something that you should respect. Taurus. Other people do matter. Other people continue to matter. And the reason for this is that, well, one reason is that the moon is continuing to move through Scorpio. And of course, Scorpio is your opposite sign. And so with moon moving through Scorpio, you do have to consider what other people are doing and what other people want. And while the moon moves through Scorpio, it makes an opposition to Uranus and it makes a trine to Saturn. I get the feel that opposition to Uranus is more important than the trine to Saturn. I mean, not least because oppositions are a stronger aspect than a trine. On the other hand, I suppose Saturn is a traditional planet, but I suppose if we try to unpack that, so first there is moon trine Saturn, and I think with moon trine Saturn, what you should be endeavoring to do today, Taurus, is to consider the various relationships that you're involved with and ask yourself how they can be grounded and how they can be streamlined. You know, certain relationships may be a bit up in the air. It may be not clear what's going on. It's possible also that one aspect of a relationship is not properly sorted out. You know, maybe that there's a financial aspect, or some other aspect needs to be addressed. And while it's not addressed, there's always going to be tension. And so that moon trine Saturn is perhaps going to allow you to bring things down to earth. And it's always a good idea to create stability, because that prepares you for instability maybe later on. And of course, once the moon makes its trine to Saturn, it makes an opposition to Uranus. And so that moon opposition Uranus is right across the main axis of your chart. Uranus in Taurus, moon in Scorpio. And so with moon opposition Uranus, relationships could be a little bit unstable, particularly if things are kept back, because the longer you keep things back, the more they explode, or the more they explode in the end. And so don't expect relationships to entirely run to plan. And you might have your own views about relationships and the way relationships should work. After all, Venus, which is your ruler, is a semi-square the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. It's also moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. And I've already discussed this when I was giving a broad overview about what's going on astrologically. But I think specifically with that Venus aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, I think, Taurus, you might reach the conclusion that certain relationships are actually limiting you. And if certain relationships have become a central part of your life and have been taking up a lot of your time, you may feel that a bit of distance is required. Now, that is difficult for a Taurus, because once Taurus is in a relationship, it can just become part of the scenery very quickly. Even if it's sort of a new relationship, you've been in some kind of relationship, whatever the relationship's nature, for a couple of weeks, it becomes part of the scenery. And before you know it, it's just permanent. It's a permanent feature. But is that what you want? Because every relationship has a capacity for limitation. It's configuring your life. And if you're involved in too many relationships, you have no freedom, because you are completely constrained by the people you're in relationships with. they have ideas about who you are, what you're supposed to be doing, and you end up having zero freedom. And maybe Venus aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint is a suggestion here that certain relationships, it is time to distance yourself, to start to take a step back. And, as I said at the beginning of this video, towards the beginning of this video, if you end a relationship, that creates a possibility of a new relationship coming up, a new relationship taking its place. And also today we have got a heliocentric conjunction between Venus and Uranus. And, you had a geocentric conjunction between Venus and Uranus quite recently, but now it's heliocentric. And with that heliocentric conjunction, it could be about things happening that you weren't expecting. Now, ideally, if you want change and you want to have unexpected events, in a way, you should be trying to initiate them. So if you don't like the way things are, make the change. Because if you don't make the change, then the change could come from outside. And so the more proactive you are, the more you work with the world and you try to create your vision of the world, the less you're going to be caught unawares by something coming from the outside world. But it could happen. So don't expect things to run entirely to plan with Venus conjunct Uranus, and relationships could strengthen and weaken and go critical very quickly. And I think I just have to say, well, just be prepared. Finally, I suppose, quick point, Sun making a trine to Pluto. Sun trine Pluto, that might be connected with money. And it may actually be a good idea to find ways of making more money. It could be career-based, that Sun trine Pluto. So you could notice a way to make more money out of whatever work you do. That's one possibility. If you're working, you may be very aware of the financial dimension, and you might sort of notice something financially that is important to your business or your employers or the people you're working for. That's particularly important if you work with money. If money and finances and accounts is important to you and what you're doing. Gemini, you are perhaps not in the most wildly extroverted mood at the moment. I think Gemini, with the moon continuing to move through Scorpio, you want things done in a particular way. You're not really in the mood for surprises. And I know this kind of contradicts the fact that we have just had we've just had the sun moving into your sign, and perhaps you were expecting a big change with the sun moving into the sun moving into Gemini. But with the moon in Scorpio, you may feel that something is not quite moving as fast as it should be. Or maybe you're expecting change to come from out there, and whereas the change has to come from within yourself. And if you want change, Gemini, perhaps the first thing you need to do is to change your immediate space. That space in which you function in needs to change. And being a Gemini, I sort of look at my environment and I think I'm talking to myself. I'm giving myself some advice there as well. I am in a pretty chaotic environment here. I mean, in terms of the way things are, as I often say, if I were to extend the zoom on that camera, it would be bad. It would be really bad. It would be embarrassing. That's why I try to keep the zoom angle as narrow as possible, because I just don't want you to see the rest of this room. But that's perhaps a reminder to me. And so change yourself first before you consider what changes you can make in terms of the outside world. Though the Sun is making a trine to Pluto. And that's the Sun in Gemini, trine Pluto in Aquarius, and we see the theme of change again. Sun trine Pluto does give you the ability to turn things upside down, to bring transformation to bear, and transformation in terms of other people and in terms of yourself. And transformation can take many forms, and that can be about ideas. That Pluto in Aquarius from a Gemini view is about ideas about the world and your philosophy and your religion. And perhaps you've taken it for granted that you have a set of beliefs, that you have a set of opinions, but now you're realizing, hold on, are your opinions from the past really serving you well? And maybe with Sun trine Pluto, you're having second thoughts. Though, Gemini, it's actually quite a good time to be imposing your opinions and beliefs on other people. So if there's something you feel strongly about with that Sun trine Pluto, I think you can really get your message across. And you will be helped by the fact that Mercury which is your ruler, of course, that Mercury is conjunct the Sun-Mars midpoint. So as a pair, Sun-Mars are very dynamic planets. They want action. They're very energetic. And so with Mercury conjunct the Sun-Mars midpoint, you can bring to bear a lot of power. Of course, you firstly got to use that energy to sort yourself out, but there may be some energy left over which you can use to create the beginnings of change in the world around you. But you have to initiate this change. And going back to what I was saying at the beginning of this piece on Gemini, that you might start the day with a certain feeling of disappointment, but things aren't moving as fast as you would like. And perhaps that's because you are expecting things to happen from the outside, just to happen. But it doesn't work like that. You have to make things happen. And I'm quite confident that today you actually can make things happen. But just remember, action begins at home. Cancer. Your ruler is the moon, and the moon is in Scorpio. So in some respects, Cancer, you're in quite an intense mood. You feel that the world is serious, but you also feel that your creativity is a serious matter. It's important that you are doing something which you are recognized for doing, but recognition shouldn't really bother you. Recognition isn't the point. Unless you're thinking about recognition from yourself, it's kind of Cancer. What you should perhaps be thinking about, is self-recognition, recognizing yourself and recognizing your genius. You don't need recognition from the outside world, and you could say that the less contact you have with other people, particularly when it comes to what you're doing in terms of things that are special to you. There are special things to do that are really important to you, that are an important reflection of who you are, and you probably don't need any disturbance, don't want any disturbance. Just keep focusing. But it may well be that the outside world cannot be avoided. And we do have an opposition aspect between the moon and Uranus. So this moon-Uranus opposition could be a little bit tense. It, it may be that you feel that you're under pressure and you almost resent that pressure. Perhaps that pressure is coming from other people, friends, people you think should know better, but they are putting you under a bit of pressure. And I don't think you're very comfortable about it, at least in the first instance. And, maybe what you need to do is to carefully consider who your friends are, who your contacts are, who you're spending your time with. And one aspect we do have today is a trine aspect between the moon and Saturn. So moon is in Scorpio and it's trine Saturn in Pisces. So moon, of course, is your ruler, but Saturn rules Capricorn. And of course, Saturn is, that means that Saturn is ruler of your opposite. Saturn is ruler of your opposite sign. So when you've got moon trine Saturn, that does indicate that you and another person can find a useful way of living, a way of functioning and interacting with each other. It's perhaps about a relationship being stabilized, and perhaps you and someone else finding out how useful each other's company really is. So if you're in a relationship, now would be perhaps a time to stabilize things and to find things that you have in common, and perhaps not to obsess about things that make you different, especially as the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. Yeah, that moon opposition Uranus could, I think, be quite destabilizing. And so perhaps you need to make the most of the moon trine Saturn to prepare yourself for the moon opposition Uranus. Though we do have a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter forming, and that conjunction is going to be exact tomorrow. You could argue that Jupiter does actually have a relationship to the sign Cancer. How I always say, oh, moon rules Cancer, but you could argue that Jupiter has a sort of rulership with Cancer, and that is because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And so perhaps when looking at the Cancerian horoscope, one needs to perhaps look at Jupiter as well as the moon. And the fact that Venus is moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter may affect Cancer in a beneficial way, and perhaps it could be quite lucky, and it could be about getting luck from association with the right person. So we could symbolize perhaps you as being Jupiter if we take the concept of exaltation rulerships, and we take you as Jupiter. Venus might be another person, perhaps a friend you haven't utilized as much as you should have done. Maybe they have been a resource that's been available to you, but you just haven't thought they were important. And perhaps now you can benefit from someone who maybe in the past you had taken for granted. Leo's are really going to be inclined to just keep their own company, I think. I think in a perfect Leo world, that would be what would happen. I mean, you might feel that you've got a lot on your plate, that you don't need to spend too much time interacting, and you're just going to be comfortable when you're in your own space, on your own territory, not having to worry about anything else. But there are things going on. For example, the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. And with that moon opposition Uranus, however hard you try to be alone and to keep yourself to yourself, there are things happening out there which just simply can't be avoided. They crop up when you least expect them, and they need your attention. And if you don't pay attention to them, things become more difficult and things become more unstable. So you've got to be ready to act. And I would have said that the more you try to keep yourself to yourself today, the less stable things are going to be. Because you will be allowing things to build up. And I think you don't want to allow things to build up. That's really what you must not do today. Let things build up. You need to be engaging, interacting, preventing, pressure bubbles forming. And that may be the best way of handling today's energies. And, the moon is making a trine to Saturn. And this does give you the chance to stabilize things before they get out of control, and maybe you can do this with another person's help. And another thing to point out is that the Sun is making a trine to Pluto, and the Sun is of course your ruler, and the Sun has just gone into Gemini a day or two ago, and it's making a trine to Pluto, and that actually could put you in quite a strong position, and it's a good reason why you shouldn't turn your back on the outside world, because when you actually make the effort to be with people, okay, not any people, but just people who are broadly have the same priorities as you, or on the same wavelength, you actually can be very powerful, because Sun is trine Pluto. Sun trine Pluto is about someone who is able to create a transformative environment, and you're someone who I don't think is ignored. The Sun is the only traditional planet in an air sign. Okay, Pluto is in an air sign, but Pluto is generational. It tends to stay in one sign for a very long time, and so you're the person that's creating space for others, that's creating freedom, and you're able to provide people with opportunities. After all, the Sun is in Gemini. Gemini is about a choice. It's not just one way of doing things, it's two ways of doing things. And you are the choice. You're someone who can present people with choices. And if you make a special effort to respect people's freedom, you really can have a transformative impact. And maybe that's what the moon opposition Uranus is all about. I've talked about it so far in this piece, the Leo section, in quite a negative light, but that moon opposition Uranus is about freedom, and it's giving the people the opportunity to express themselves if you can take advantage of it and use your power in the right way. So overall, Leo, it's a day for really allowing people to express themselves, giving people permission to express themselves, and at the same time always giving people choices, because people like choices, and by giving people choices, you're giving them their freedom, and I think they're going to really appreciate you. So I think on the surface it seems to be a day which appears a little bit unstable, but if you really attack the day with everything you've got, and you understand your talents and your abilities, and as also your social skills and your capacity to be a tolerant person who allows people to express themselves, then I think things should work very well for you. Virgo. Virgo, you do have a fair amount of power at your disposal. I mean, after all, Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is conjunct the Sun-Mars midpoint. So, there are going to be lots of things that you want to do, and I think you're going to have more energy than usual at your disposal. And it's going to be important that you are able to focus this energy, because the problem about having too much energy is that you might scatter it. And from a Virgo view, that can be about just noticing lots of different things, and you notice lots of different things and you chase them, and then you notice something else and you chase it, and you end up getting nothing done. So Virgo, I just think it's very important that you have a single point of focus. I think that would be really useful. And I think it's probably important that you don't talk too much. I do understand that you do have a lot to say, but you have to be sparing in your words. Say things which are important, which are absolutely meaningful, which address the challenges of the time. And that's enough. And then you can start to tune into your power. And I think that you're going to be helped by a number of things, not just the fact that Mercury is conjunct the Sun-Mars midpoint, but also the fact that the Sun is trine Pluto. Now that Sun trine Pluto is important for Virgos because the Sun is in Gemini, and Gemini from a Virgo angle is quite a high profile sign. It is in fact the most high profile sign. It's connected with the way you appear, with the way you come across, and so you've got Sun in Gemini, and it's trine Pluto. So that trine Pluto gives you power. It gives you organizational power, massive organizational power, and you don't have to tell people what to do. You just have to do it, and your view of the way the universe should be organized is the right way. I mean, that is correct. And from your perspective, of course, it's all very subjective, but by expressing your organizational power, perhaps through example, you'll find that people do pay attention to you, and that could just make your position really quite strong. At the same time, Venus is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and this Venus conjunction, this Venus-Jupiter conjunction may have some bearing on other people, and it's difficult to know exactly how it's going to work. Jupiter may be about another person, and I think it probably is. And Venus is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and so I think this might be one other person who has very high expectations. They want things to happen in a particular way. They're not really happy with second best, and you perhaps have to ask yourself whether you can be bothered. I mean, sure, you can provide someone with what they're looking for, but maybe you don't want to provide someone with what they're looking for. Yeah, you know what they want, but are you going to give it to them? And you might decide you don't want to give it to them. And you may have to accept that if you don't give people what they want, then that might change their view of you, and they might not want to be, They might, for example, in an extreme case, might not want to be part of your life. And that really can't be helped, can it? Your job is not to give in to other people's expectations, particularly now. I mean, this is a time when Virgos are in a strong position, and you can't please everyone. And perhaps you just have to accept that certain aspects of your social life, some of the people around you, there has to be a bit of reconfiguration. And as one person leaves, another person turns up. So things will be in balance. So don't feel guilty if some of your actions or non-actions lead to the weakening of a couple of relationships. Libra. Venus is getting very close to Jupiter. It's going to be exact tomorrow. And Venus is, of course, your ruler. And this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is, I would have said, pretty fortunate. It represents a time when you have opportunities and luck. But I think it's just going to be important that you understand the nature of these opportunities and this luck. It just may not be obvious. So while I think there are opportunities today and tomorrow even more so, they may not be in places where you expect them to be. So, luck could be found in places which, they may be quite dismal. They may be in places which almost feel unlucky. The last place you expect, what's that, the phrase, where there's muck, there's brass. If you have to find the money in the mud. Although I suppose that in that set, that I think that phrase, where there's muck, there's brass, also of course talks about underhand activities, muck. So I wouldn't want to exaggerate that analogy too much, but you've got to look for things in unexpected places, and what you mustn't do is reject people and situations because you're thinking, oh, that's no good. You're not going to find what you're looking for there. You can find what you're looking for in some very strange places. And I think that may be how, one way at least, how the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to work. And also, with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it does take place in the last degree of Taurus. And there may be an indication that over the next couple of days, you have to have your eyes wide open, because we may be talking about a situation where there is a narrowing window of opportunity for you to gain from a particular piece of luck, or to be able to take advantage of a particular opportunity, and that window is starting to close. So you've got to be very alert, and you have to be very positive. Terribly important to be optimistic. And okay, I know I was saying yesterday that I have my doubts about positive thinking. I think it's okay to have positive thinking today, and I think tomorrow, but positive thinking does not mean laziness. It doesn't mean just having some idea in your mind. You think, well, what do they tell you? You think of $1 million, and if you think about $1 million hard enough, you'll get your $1 million. I'm not talking about that. Positive thinking has to be paired with positive action, and particularly over the next couple of days, because you just simply do not want to miss the opportunity. Now, there may actually be a certain tendency, Libra, at the moment, to actually be quite negative. to think, what is the point? And so that contrasts with what I've just been saying. So from a psychological perspective, you actually don't seem to be very positive right now. You're perhaps thinking about all the things that could go wrong, and I think you have to snap out of it. This does not have a bearing on reality, though one thing you can do, Libra, is perhaps reposition yourself, because I think it's possible, Libra, that you're in an environment which is somewhat negative, and you're not getting the feedback you should be getting, and maybe a slight shift in where you are, who you're mixing with, might be useful, but it might just be about a state of mind. I mean, I wouldn't just leave somewhere just because it makes you feel bad, because it may be that places that make you feel bad are actually the places where you can get unexpected luck. So let me rephrase that. I think you do have negative thoughts, and I think you are a bit negative about what's going on around you. And the temptation might be to just leave and go find somewhere more pleasant. Alternatively, you perhaps need some kind of mental transformation. Think positively, but also act positively. And maybe you need to just persist with a somewhat difficult situation for just a little bit longer, because you may be on the verge of being able to benefit from you, and it would be a shame if you were to give up at the last moment. Scorpio. Moon continues moving through your sign, which in one sense is good. I mean, it's always good when the moon is in Scorpio, if you're a Scorpio, because you're simply feeling at one with the world around you. It's an emotional world. You're an emotional person. You know how to behave, but things can get a little bit difficult. Today, after all, the moon, while moving through Scorpio, is making an opposition to Uranus. You've got Moon-Uranus opposition. And okay, it might be tomorrow if you're in East Asia, Australia or New Zealand, but still we've got Moon in Scorpio, Uranus in Taurus. We've still got that, even if they're not in exact aspect. And so what might happen, Scorpio, is that maybe people who should know better could cause a fair amount of disruption. They may just do things you weren't expecting. And that could be really annoying, having to sort of disrupt. Everything gets disrupted because of the way people behave. But maybe, Scorpio, you need to make the most of your sensitivity. If you tune into your sensitivity, you should be able to understand what people are feeling. And if people are under pressure, you should be able to pick up on it hours before you see any explosion. And so I would have said, Scorpio, you need to keep a close eye on the people around you. And that close eye, I'm maybe talking about the third eye, your psychic abilities, or certainly your sensitivity. And you need to be able to anticipate their actions. And by anticipating their actions, you're in a position to be able to stabilize the situation before things become too difficult. And I think that's something you can do, and I think that's just something you can be aware of. Though I think it's also important that you don't have high expectations. I think that you do have ideas about what can happen, what can be. You have plans, and you'd like to put these plans into action. And these plans are going to perhaps involve other people's cooperation. That's how you envisaged it, envisioned it. Maybe you've already discussed your ideas with people. But you're going to be really disappointed because people are just not going to be able to engage with these ideas. They're not going to be sympathetic. They're going to want to postpone things. They might have said they take you seriously and they don't take you seriously. And that could really annoy you. But again, don't be annoyed. It's just the way it is at the moment. And you should regard this as just being a temporary irritation. Also, from a work, career, status perspective, I think there is some useful stuff going on. So if you're working, I think it's a time when you need to start seeing things in a different way. You've perhaps been seeing things in one way, but now you need to start seeing things in two ways. And I suppose you're accepting the fact that the sun is in Gemini. It's always a bit of a problem when the sun's in Gemini if you're a Scorpio, because Scorpio and Gemini are just very different signs. And this difference is really emphasized today with Moon in Scorpio, and I suppose yesterday, but Moon in Scorpio, Sun in Gemini, there is a clash. But you need to consider how the whole Gemini energy can benefit Scorpio. And that Gemini is all about seeing two possibilities, seeing an alternative possibility. And from a perspective of work, career, business, the things you want to do to advance your agenda, whatever that agenda might be, you're now starting to see another possibility. Now, this other possibility is probably something that in the first instance you're not very keen on. It seems challenging, it seems a pain, it seems like too much like hard work, but you need to consider this other alternative possibility. It may be quite revolutionary in its own way, this alternative possibility. But the sun is making a trine to Pluto. And I think that sun trine Pluto is something that Scorpios are going to pick up on. And so when you actually give an alternative possibility some time to really think about it, to really get to grips with what it's all about, you might have a revelation that actually this is the way forward, that by doing something that you hadn't expected, and certainly no one else had expected, you can get real results. Okay, I'm not talking about doing something now, because we're still at the planning stage, but I think that Sun trine Pluto could be quite inspirational for you. Oh, and finally, I should say something about relationships. Venus is conjunct Jupiter. The conjunction is exact tomorrow, but you can still feel it. Also, heliocentrically, Venus is making a conjunction to Uranus, and that means, in terms of one-to-one relationships, you should be open-minded, and you shouldn't be surprised if someone does something you weren't expecting. Now, Scorpio is a fixed sign. Scorpio doesn't like to be surprised, usually. But so if a surprise happens, if someone does something you weren't expecting, particularly if they're close to you, if they're important to you, and they do something that you hadn't planned for, then don't get too annoyed and don't get sort of too possessive about it. You have to, to understand that people are expressing their freedom, and they want to express their freedom. And heliocentrically, Venus conjunct Uranus. Venus is the other person. Uranus is all about freedom, and Venus conjunct Jupiter geocentrically, you're talking about someone who has high expectations, that wants to take advantage of it, of everything that's on offer, and you don't want to be seen to be the person holding them back. Sagittarius, you probably are not being typically Sagittarian. I think I said something similar yesterday. I think that from a Sagittarian view, it's a somewhat downbeat day, when things may not be working as well as you'd like them to, and you don't feel particularly inclined to sort of raise your head above the parapet. Not really. And perhaps there are things you need to work through, but I suppose you may need a little bit of a change of attitude. Maybe things aren't quite as difficult as they seem, and what you must particularly avoid is the black dog, isn't it? As they call it, the black dog, because Winston Churchill, he was a Sagittarius, and he always talked about the black dog, which was, I think he described the black dog was how he personified depression. And I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about depression in a clinical way. I'm not. I'd rather use a different word. But I think that there is a certain capacity here today for Sagittarians to feel a bit negative, to the point of non-clinical depression. Non-clinical, I'm not talking about medications or going to see doctors and psychiatrists or anything, but just things just aren't moving as much as you'd like to, and that might make you feel a bit down. Of course, I think that Winston Churchill got upset about his and got a bit depressed because there wasn't anything going on. I think he wanted to get his teeth into things, and I think this was during his wilderness years in the 1930s. In the 1930s, when he was out of government, but it was before the Second World War happened. He just didn't know what to do with himself, and I think that may have made him feel a bit negative. So maybe you've got the same problem as Winston Churchill at the moment. You just don't feel that you've really got your teeth into you really can't get your teeth into anything, and it just may be that other people that are able to take the initiative, particularly now that the sun has gone into the sun has gone into Gemini, your opposite sign. Though I should point out that Venus is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and Jupiter is of course your ruler, and Jupiter is a benefic, it's a fortunate planet. Venus is also a fortunate planet, and with Venus making a conjunction to Jupiter, you maybe need to be open to something new, something coming in to cheer you up, and that Venus could well be another person. So look at your social environment. Look at the people who you might be able to, talk to, and interact with. And I think there's at least one person who can really cheer you up. But if that doesn't sound appropriate, then I would also say that it may actually be a reflection of your living space. There may be something about your living space that is making you feel a bit down. And with that Venus conjunct Jupiter, which is about aesthetics, about how things look, and it may be that small changes to your living space, just moving things around, throwing things away, could make all the difference. Or maybe just opening a window, that simple action of opening a window or closing a window, it depends, could make a big difference. And so do have a positive approach, and also I suppose you need to find something to get your teeth into. That's really important. What do you want to involve yourself in? And from a creative perspective, we shouldn't forget that Mars is in Aries, still in Aries. It's still conjunct the North Node, by the way. Okay, that North Node conjunction is breaking up, but it's still there. And perhaps what you need to do to sort of make yourself feel happier is to just concentrate on something you really enjoy doing. And who cares what other people think? Do that. Do what you're enjoying doing. Do it in a space that is properly organized. Perhaps get a little bit of support from another person, and then I think you'll be fine. And you can put the black dog to bed. Capricorn. You would like very much to be sociable and to share your ideas with other people, but it can be difficult, can't it? Yes, the moon is in Scorpio, and from a Capricorn angle with the moon in Scorpio, you kind of would like a little bit of outside support and social stimulation, but it's going to be difficult. I mean, I think you do have high standards, and at the same time, some people are just really difficult and really annoying. And things aren't helped by the fact that the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So we can see perhaps the moon as being about another person or about a situation which is beyond your control, and it's opposition Uranus. And so that moon opposition Uranus can potentially be quite destabilizing. And you may find that other people's reactions and behavior are just quite unsuitable and are just not helping things. And so you may take the view that just other people can't be trusted, and that if you want to do something, it's best that you just do it yourself. And I wouldn't have necessarily said that you're wrong on that score, though the moon, while it is in Scorpio, is not just making an opposition to Uranus, it's also making a trine to Saturn. So moon rules Cancer, your opposite sign. Saturn is your ruler. So with moon trine Saturn, it does seem that you can find common ground with another person, and that other person, may be a partner, spouse, someone you spend a lot of time with, likely to be that kind of person. And so maybe what you need to do is to think ahead. So you may be in a situation where you and another person are heading towards some kind of argument. You can see it if you're honest with yourself. It may not be an argument, it just may be a disagreement. And you can take action to preempt the situation. So it's perhaps your responsibility to create a bit of structure and stability beforehand, and then when the disagreement comes into being, you'll be properly prepared, and there won't be a major falling out or anything like that. And so use your skill to work out how people are going to behave before they know what they're going to, before they actually start behaving in it. So I think you will have a bit of warning, and I think that moon trine Saturn allows you to prepare. And that moon trine Saturn can also be about new relationships. It's possible. I don't think new relationships necessarily in a dramatic way, but I think that your social skills are actually quite good today, and you'll come over as being a fairly stable person, as a safe pair of hands, someone who can be trusted. And I think in general, people are going to like you. And I think that you're helped by the fact that you want people to get on with each other. That's really important to you at the moment. And you're able to, if you try very hard, to create an environment where people can get on with each other. And it may be a good time, for example, to introduce people to each other. I mean, not necessarily as a matchmaker, but just as someone who can create the right environment for two people to get on with each other. And I think I've talked about this before, and it may relate to your family as well. That if there have been recent issues in your family and people have been not talking to each other or arguing with each other, then I think your actions and your sensitivity can make a big difference. Another thing going on today is that we do have Venus moving to a conjunction of Jupiter. Now, this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter is exact tomorrow, but you're still feeling it. And I would have thought that this Venus conjunct Jupiter is going to be quite fortunate, and it may allow you to really harness some of your abilities. Perhaps you've got some abilities that you haven't really been using, and you perhaps have been wondering, well, what is the point? What are they for? Why did you bother learning how to do something? But now you can actually harness that, and I think that can help you in numerous ways. Now, it could just be in terms of personal satisfaction, feeling you're doing something useful and creative. It could help you if you're working, or if you have a business. I think that there could be over the next day or two some good news as far as work, business, career. Could it be a good time to apply for a job? Maybe. I think in the sense that you can persuade another person that you've really got the skills in order to do a job. And I think if there's an interview over the next few days, I don't know whether it's a good idea to have an interview, for example, today with Moon in Scorpio opposition Uranus, but I think it's a time when you can really start to explain to people what you can do. Maybe you've been explaining to them in the past what you can do and they haven't been listening, but I think increasingly they are going to be listening, and if appropriate, that can help you in terms of career and business. Aquarius. There is a trine between the Sun and Pluto, and Pluto is in Aquarius, of course, and Sun is in Gemini. So these are Aquarius-friendly signs. Of course, Aquarius is an Aquarius-friendly sign because it's Aquarius, obviously, but Gemini is another Aquarius-friendly sign. And so with the Sun trine Pluto, Aquarius, you are really in quite a good position, and you are in a position where you can really make things happen. And if you want things to happen, it's not going to actually take much energy. You can gently push things in a direction of your choosing, and things will just move in a very natural way. And it might not seem much to begin with, but once things do start moving, they will keep moving. And in your own way, you're therefore going to be able to create some kind of transformation. Though I do think you are going to have to be a little bit thick-skinned today, because the Moon is opposition Uranus. So we could see the moon in Scorpio as being you trying to make progress. And there are a lot of things, Aquarius, that you're trying to make progress on. And you want to be seen and heard. You kind of wonder whether you've actually got what it takes to be seen and heard, but you feel that you've still got to make the effort. But there could be some obstacles, things happening that you hadn't entirely planned for, and that could frustrate your progress. And if you do find your progress frustrated today, things just happening that you weren't planning for, I think part of the reason might be that you haven't done sufficient preparation. So, the idea is that you were supposed to clear the path. You were supposed to make sure that nothing was in your way before making your big move. And if you haven't cleared the path properly, then you could get yourself into trouble. But you can clear the path. After all, today the moon is making a trine aspect to Saturn. Saturn is your ruler. And so with that, and Saturn is also a planet of relating to organization and responsibility. So Aquarius, if you get to work on organization, you need to think ahead. What could go wrong? What obstacles are you likely to hit? You get rid of those obstacles. And once you've done that, you're in a clear position to move forward. And if there is turbulence, you'll be prepared and you'll have answers, and that will ensure that it's a day in which you can make substantial progress. Pisces, you are trying to think beyond the immediate situation. You don't want to get stuck in one place, do you? And being a Pisces, you do appreciate your freedom in a way. After all, Pisces, it's about the tide, isn't it? It's about the sea. It's about being able to move this way and that way, and you want the freedom to be able to quickly move from one place to another in response to some external event, or maybe you want to escape something, or maybe you see something that you find attractive and you want to move in that direction, and that's the way you like it to be. But there could be some hold-ups. Hold-ups, I think, caused by perhaps a lack of preparation, but it could be just the wrong focus. So Pisces, maybe you have this broad vision about what you want to do, where you want to go. And it's a broad vision. Broad visions, by their very nature, don't focus too much on detail, because the detail is not particularly important to begin with. You only have to deal with detail later on. And that's a problem about having to deal with detail really, really early, too early. Because if you have to deal with detail too early, that just slows you down. And so that's really something you don't want to do. But unfortunately today, you might get a little bit obsessed about small details, small facts that you really shouldn't be having to worry about, but suddenly you notice these things and you respond quite dramatically. So you may over-respond. And by over-responding to small things that aren't really worthy of your response, you might, in certain situations, grind yourself down to an absolute standstill. So try not to get caught and try not to get distracted. Now, from a positive perspective, Venus is starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. Now, that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter is exact tomorrow, but it's still very close. and Jupiter is your ruler. Jupiter rules Pisces, and it's not Neptune that rules Pisces. Neptune certainly has an association with Pisces. It has a sympathy with Pisces, but Venus, it's Jupiter that rules Pisces. And so this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter is happening. And actually this conjunction involves Neptune as well, because Venus will be conjunct Jupiter and Venus and Jupiter will be sextile Neptune. And I do think that this Venus conjunct Jupiter is fortunate. I think that you will have a sense of your own good fortune. I hope. You'll start to realize that really you can get things done and that the universe is on your side, provided you focus on the right things and you don't get distracted. And one thing going on with Jupiter is that Jupiter which is your ruler, is actually on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. It's aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. And I was talking to Sagittarius about this, and I was telling Sagittarius that you have to be careful about negative thoughts, because these negative thoughts could spoil their luck. I was suggesting that. And so talking to you about this Mercury-Saturn midpoint and how I think it could manifest, I think it goes back to what I was saying about getting sidetracked by irrelevant detail. You need to keep in mind the broad vision. And that broad vision can be yours. But if you focus too much on how you turn that vision into reality and the various little details that need to be sorted out, if you focus too much about those things at too early a stage, you could spoil everything. And I suppose one might see Jupiter on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint as being overly concerned about details which right now aren't, strictly speaking, relevant. So Pisces, I just would really recommend that you try to have that broad vision, and you worry about the precise way in which you're going to turn that vision into reality at a later stage. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was, I'm afraid, hexagram 12, which is standstill. Things are just not moving. That might be how it feels. I suppose that could link with, if you could link with the moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio can be a bit stuck. It's a fixed sign. People just not being able to move on. And we might also find that there are elements around us which are really holding us up. The I Ching would call them sort of inferior elements or even evil elements. I think that is a bit dramatic, but we do have this image with this hexagram of a standstill. You've got 3 broken lines at the bottom. The bottom trigram is 3 broken lines. Top trigram is 3 unbroken lines. And so you almost get the image of heaven shutting the door. So you get the image of a ladder to a loft, and you're down there on earth, and heaven is up in the loft, and heaven is shutting its door, shutting the door in the ceiling. So we can't go up. So heaven is where heaven is, earth is where earth is, and there's nothing between them, because you have to take action to make sure that the evil elements are kept in place. And that gives us an environment where we do have real standstill. It may just feel that nothing is going on and nothing is happening. And we do have 3 moving lines. And the second moving line is talking about the need to put up with people. There are inferior elements, people who we regard as being below us, but somehow we have to just persist with them. We can't make them go away, and we have to tolerate them, and it's going to be hard work, and they're going to slow us down, but there's probably not much we can do about it. Then the 4th line moves, and the situation is starting to improve at this stage, and some of us might actually start to feel some kind of calling, that we are faced with a problem that, you know, that has to be dealt with. It's really difficult, nothing's moving, but we feel that we are called to do something about it. And it's not easy, but we may be trusted by, I don't know, other people to try to do something about it, and we have to be careful how we do it, but we do have that calling should be enough to take us through. And this moves to the 5th line, and in the I Ching the 5th line is usually quite fortunate, and this is about the changeover from standstill to actually something moving. And it's a time when we are nervous. We can see how things can go wrong. But because we are very aware of everything that can go wrong, then, you know, we can benefit from the situation and we can prepare for it. You know, it's perhaps what I was saying when I was talking about the astrology. We had Moon trine Saturn today, followed by Moon opposition Uranus. So Moon trine Saturn is perhaps preparing for something, being ready for Moon opposition Uranus and the instability connected with Moon opposition Uranus. So when the 5th line moves, that allows us to really create real change, and that standstill can start to come to an end, and we can actually start to get movement. It is difficult, and it does feel that we are taking a bit of a risk. And this hexagram standstill, it does change, and it changes to hexagram 4. Now, hexagram 4, youthful folly, is a difficult one, because youthful folly is very often about the I Ching telling you to go away. It's basically saying, you've asked this question before, you've kept on asking these questions, I'm not going to give you any answers anymore. And of course, I'm asking an I Ching. I'm doing an I Ching every single day because I want to do these videos, and I want to have an I Ching section. But it almost, the I Ching may be telling me, just stop it. You bother me every single day. I'm sick of you. That's one thing that it might mean. But in terms of the current question, what's going on today, it's really saying that if there's something bothering you, some solution that you're looking for, the I Ching is telling you, you know what to do. You don't have to watch me. It's almost saying, you know, because why are you watching this video? You're watching this video because I suppose you're interested in astrology. That might be one way. Or you're interested in I Ching, or you may just want to know what's going to happen. So I have to be honest here, and I Ching is telling you, you should not be watching this video. At least today you shouldn't be watching this video, because you know what to do. you know what you should be doing, you know what's going to happen next. You don't have to be told. So you know what's going to happen. So stop wasting your time. So that might be one interpretation of youthful folly. But what it's saying is that, having created this potential breakthrough, because there has been a standstill and things haven't been moving, things are starting to move, and at that point at which things start to move, you may be wondering what to do now. There may be a sense of indecision. And perhaps what the I Ching is telling you is, you know what to do now. You don't really have to think about it. You've been told. And you know what mistakes you made in the past. And maybe in the past you were dealing with a situation which you weren't particularly familiar with, but now you are familiar with. And it's just saying, well, get on and do it. And don't listen to anyone else, and perhaps don't listen to this video. And that is the I Ching. And I now want to consider Jupiter moving through Gemini. I mean, I could have talked about it later in the week, but I mean, it's now Wednesday. Of course, yes, I'm recording this on Tuesday, but the people in Australia are going to be people in Australia and New Zealand when it's already Wednesday. If you want to know what's happening on Tuesday, there's a video for that as well, and I'll probably put it in a link in the description. So let's consider what it means for Jupiter to be in Gemini, because we've had Jupiter in Taurus for a long time, and Jupiter goes into Gemini over the weekend, and it stays in Gemini for the rest of the year. I suppose while I'm at it, I should tell you when Jupiter actually leaves Gemini. That's always worth knowing. So Jupiter leaves Gemini. Jupiter will leave Gemini. It stays in Gemini until for over a year. Jupiter will leave Gemini in early June. To be precise, Jupiter enters Cancer on June the 9th at 10:02 p.m. UK time. So Jupiter's going to be in Gemini for over a year. So we better get used to it being in Gemini. And so is this something that we should be looking forward to? Well, not necessarily, because Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, therefore it's in its detriment in Gemini. Jupiter does not work well in Gemini, and the reason it doesn't work well in Gemini is it's quite obvious, because Jupiter is the planet of like big concepts, the big idea. Not even ideas, it's about a philosophy, it's about a principle. But Gemini is all about analysing things, analysing the facts, trying to break things up. And so Jupiter does not appreciate being in Gemini. It's tough for Jupiter to be in Gemini. And while Jupiter is in Gemini, we might be spending a lot of time focusing on the facts. Small facts are not the big principle. And there can then be a certain amorality there to Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter in Gemini doesn't have a vision. And so that can be part of the experience of Jupiter in Gemini. People not having a vision. And okay, there can be good things about people not having a vision, because visions can be very destructive. If you try to impose your vision on another person. So perhaps with Jupiter and Gemini, with this lack of vision, people focusing on smaller units. I suppose facts, details are smaller units, which together can build up the big vision. But that vision just is not potentially going to be there. So that's one aspect of Jupiter being in Gemini. And I'm looking at it from a theoretical perspective. But what about from a practical perspective? What actually happens in the past when Jupiter is in Gemini? Now, there's one thing about Jupiter in Gemini, why Jupiter in Gemini is potentially important. And this doesn't relate to the fact that, to looking at Jupiter and Gemini from a theoretical perspective. It relates to the reality of a world in which we are living. And the reality of a world in which we are living is that the United States continues to be the main power. I mean, I believe that the United States' position is starting to shift. It's starting to go into decline. But right now, I would argue that the United States is the most powerful planet on Earth. And certainly the dollar is the reserve currency. So we do need to consider what's happening to the United States. And if we look at the United States chart here, the United States has Gemini in the 7th house cusp. If assuming the United States was born at the Declaration of Independence was signed at 5:10 in the afternoon, which I think it was, pretty close to that. And this chart seems to work. So you've got Sagittarius rising, and you have got Gemini on the 7th house cusp, and you've got a wide Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and so that is important. So whenever Jupiter goes into Gemini, it can affect the United States, and it can affect the United States' relations with the rest of the world. There's just no doubt about that. And so that may be one way in which we try to understand the impact of Jupiter moving into Gemini. And we also should not forget that Joe Biden, the United States president, has Sagittarius rising, and he has Gemini on the 7th house cusp. So when Jupiter goes into Gemini, it crosses Joe Biden's descendant. And when you think about Jupiter and Gemini, you may be thinking, oh, Jupiter, it's fortunate. I am not 100% convinced that transits from Jupiter in Gemini are always fortunate, because Jupiter is in its detriment. I think Jupiter in Gemini can yield fortunate aspect. I hope so, because I've got Sun in Gemini. I'm going to have Jupiter transiting my Sun very soon. I'm really hoping it works well. Will it? I don't know. Someone suggested I looked at my chart in a few days, in the run up to my birthday on May the 30th, but I actually show you how I look at my chart. Are you really interested in that? Does anyone care? But I do have Jupiter moving on to my Sun, but it is Jupiter in its detriment. And on the 7th house cusp, Jupiter can expand what it touches, and I think it can create conflict. So I just wanted to very quickly look at historically some previous times when Jupiter has gone into Gemini. So Jupiter went into Gemini on June the 30th, 1917. There's Jupiter, 0 degrees Gemini. I set this for Westminster. Now, how does that relate to America? Well, by June the 30th, 1917, the United States was already at war. I believe the United States declared war on Germany on April the 6th, 1917. So, didn't quite tally with the United States entering the First World War. Yet, the first serious battle that the United States fought was actually quite a long time after its entry into the First World War. And its first serious battle was the Battle of Cantigny. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's a long time since I did. Is it French? I was a bit lazy. I couldn't find the coordinates of Cantigny. I think it's fairly close to Amiens in northern France. So May the 28th, 1918 was the first battle that the United States fought in France. First serious battle. And I believe that the Americans went over the top, when there was an artillery barrage, but then at 6:45 a.m., American troops surged forward. They did win the battle. I think they took 1,600, or I don't know, but they took about 1,400 casualties, but they did win. And this is the chart for when they went over the top. So Jupiter is in Gemini. So Jupiter may have been in Taurus when America declared war on Germany, but when it actually interacted with the enemy in a serious battle, this was the an American show, and Jupiter was in Gemini, and notice that Pluto was at 4 degrees 19 Cancer. Pluto was rising, and Uranus was on the midheaven. And if you look at the United States' chart, Pluto at 4 Cancer, Pluto was very close to, was on the United States' Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So Jupiter is, I see Jupiter in Cancer, it's about Jupiter, about how America knows best. In terms of how other people's are running their governments, and I think America's obsession with regime change is about its Jupiter in Cancer, but still, Pluto in Cancer was on Jupiter's Cancer. It was on the United States' Cancer, and that kind of fits. So that is one aspect of Jupiter going into Gemini. And that's the main theme, I would have said, for Jupiter going into Gemini in 1917. Then the next time Jupiter went into Gemini was on June the 12th, 1929. And of course, Jupiter is about expansion. And Jupiter had just come out of Taurus. So Jupiter in Taurus is about money, isn't it? It's about the roaring 20s. People having money, making money in the stock market, speculation. Jupiter in Taurus, very speculative. And then Jupiter moves into Gemini. It moves into its detriment. People are no longer thinking of, that big picture, I can make all this money. And then they're thinking, hold on, does this fit? Can I really make money like that? And of course, 1929 was the year of the Wall Street crash, which started the Great Depression, which was on October the 29th, 1929. I've just set this to the noon, but there you can see Jupiter in Gemini. So in this case, with Jupiter in Gemini, the party's over, and people are starting to think, Gemini is with Gemini, it's starting to ask questions. Is this really possible? I suppose it's like the cartoon character that runs off a cliff and it's still up there. That's Jupiter in Taurus. Everything's fine. It's making money, but it's now suspended, jumped off a cliff, but it still hasn't crashed to Earth yet. And then Jupiter in Gemini starts to ask the questions: Is this real? Is this really possible? And then bang. And so that is one aspect of Jupiter in Gemini, and I suppose that's something we have to think about when we look at the stock market and prices of other assets, property as well. But bear in mind, I'm not making any predictions. This is not about financial advice, this channel. I'm just looking at what happened in the past. So 12 years later, Jupiter went into Gemini on May the 26th, 1941. Now, in May the 26th, 1941, this was, what was going on in May the 26th, 41? Well, Russia was neutral. America was neutral. The Second World War was raging. But within 3 weeks of this, less than a month, you had Operation Barbarossa, and of course, at the end of 1941, you had Pearl Harbor. So remember what I was saying about Jupiter and Gemini. Jupiter and Gemini with that first battle that the United States fought, and so. Looking at the Pearl Harbor chart, there is Pearl Harbor. Jupiter is in Gemini. It's exactly opposition the Sun. And that Jupiter-Gemini opposition is, we go back to the USA chart. So Jupiter is in Jupiter is kind of on the United States is Mars, and it's Uranus. I mean, we can let's just have a quick comparison of the United States and Pearl Harbor. So Jupiter was within 4 degrees of the United States' descendant, and it's the Mars-Uranus midpoint was at 13.6. It was fairly close to the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and also, of course, it was a Sun-Jupiter opposition. So you can see Jupiter in Gemini. As soon as when Jupiter goes into Gemini, that can emphasize America and its enemies. Well, we had 2 cases where we had that. I think we had the First World War, at least when the United States actually engaged with its enemies. And then of course we have Pearl Harbor. So in terms of Jupiter going into Gemini in later years, I think it hasn't been quite so dramatic. Jupiter went into Gemini in 1953, on May the 9th, 1953. I don't think that's. I don't think anything dramatic happened in the world. I mean, there's always something dramatic happening, but I don't think in recent years. I mean, I can go through. It happened in 1953. It happened in 1965, 1976, and 1977. So 1976 and 1977, Jupiter went into Gemini, and I suppose this was. It happened during the Carter as the Ford era moved to during the campaign for the 1976 presidential election. But we don't see that kind of drama there. But 1976, 1977 with Jupiter and Gemini was not great for the American economy. One of the reasons why Ford lost the election was, I think, because of inflation. Although by the time by the election, I think that the moon was in Taurus. So recent iterations of Jupiter in Gemini have not been as powerful as some of the earlier ones, particularly the First World War. We had a run of them, for 1917 Jupiter into Gemini, the 1929 Jupiter in Gemini, and the 1941 Jupiter in Gemini. So we had 3 Jupiters in Gemini that really hit the United States. And perhaps now the world is very complicated. Gaza, Iran, Ukraine. Perhaps the stage is set for the malefic potential of Jupiter in Gemini to rear its head yet again, and it may have just been an aberration that we had Jupiter in Gemini not working as powerfully as it did at the beginning of the 20th century. So that is certainly something to consider. And again, with 1929 and the Wall Street crash, suddenly people ask questions, and when people ask questions, they can start to realize that everything is an illusion, that stock market prices, for example, are too high. And you realize, is this really possible? And the answer is no. And that's one way in which Jupiter in Gemini can work. And so I quickly just want to look at a couple of people who have Jupiter in Gemini. I've gone on for long enough as it is. I'm not going to spend very long on it. So Vladimir Zelensky has a Jupiter in Gemini, and I kind of find that interesting. People regard Jupiter Gemini. He's the president of Ukraine, and he's got Jupiter rising, and what does that mean for him to have Jupiter in Gemini? And I think that Jupiter in Gemini is working, and I suppose Jupiter is about the philosophy. It's about his idea. And certainly with Jupiter rising, he comes over as being someone who does have an idea, as something that people really catch on to. Certainly the beginning of a war with Ukraine, the idea of Ukraine and Ukrainian independence. But we shouldn't forget that it's Jupiter in Gemini. There is something a little bit fake and contrived about Jupiter in Gemini. And I think perhaps that's what we're maybe seeing with Zelensky. And there can perhaps be a certain amount of self-interest there with Jupiter in Gemini. And this doesn't really work with people who are not work so much with people who are not famous. But I think we have to really question his vision there. It may have attracted people for a long time, but of course I think people are getting a bit tired of it, and so one perhaps has to consider how Jupiter in Gemini is working for Zelensky. Then we've got R.F. Kennedy. I don't have his time of birth, so don't think that. Let's not take it too seriously. His chart. So let me just change it to 0 degrees Aries. So Jupiter in Gemini. All things being equal, we don't have a time of birth, so it means we can't be too precise about it. But all things being equal, Jupiter in Gemini. Okay, we know he has a vision. But it may be difficult for him to maintain that vision, and he's always trying to. I think perhaps with his vision, he's always trying to keep everyone on board with that Jupiter in Gemini. That might be how Jupiter in Gemini actually works. That it's perhaps not entirely convincing, and now he's running to be president. I think we may start to see that Jupiter in Gemini start to unravel, and it could also relate perhaps to his past. Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter in Gemini could be about someone he wants to do stuff, but what's the point? And what is the point and why am I doing it? And that could, of course, relate to, when he was young, he had drug issues, and so there's a question of perhaps overthinking it and not being able to really tune into a coherent vision. I know we've got a vision that he has, and a lot of people support him, but I think one does need to question that vision. Now, I've been a bit negative about Jupiter in Gemini, but someone who was born very close to RFK is Oprah Winfrey. So Oprah Winfrey has Jupiter in Gemini, and she has got Mercury trine Jupiter in Gemini. So Jupiter in Gemini can be about the facts, it can be about television, it can be about gossip, it can be about just about communicating something effectively. And she has Mercury trine Jupiter, and so this, in her case, Jupiter may be giving her, maybe making her really very versatile, and surely that is a hallmark of her career. She's been able to build up this empire and have the basic flexibility in order to do it. Jupiter in Gemini is communicative, and it can be a bit provocative, and because Jupiter likes to communicate, and it can like to be controversial. So Candace Owens, for example, she has Jupiter in Gemini, and I don't see her Jupiter in Gemini is somewhat unaspected. There is this. Do you see what I mean? How it's not aspected? I don't see any. There's nothing opposition her Jupiter. There's nothing sextile her Jupiter. There's nothing trine her Jupiter. So there is this. There is this theory in astrology that unaspected planets are somewhat out of control. And I think perhaps with Candace Owen, she talks a lot, doesn't she? She's obviously all over YouTube. She's a sort of what is she? She's a sort of right-wing commentator. Her videos are everywhere. She can't stop. I mean, I go to YouTube and she's all over the place. She can't stop with her videos. I think she's probably putting out too much. I mean, I don't think some of her videos are actually any good. But that's Jupiter. That's Jupiter in Gemini, perhaps unaspected Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter is just looking to say more and more and more stuff, and the question is, what is it actually applying to? And so that might be a bit of a problem for her, but maybe it's works out very well for her. I mean, she's been very successful, so there's her Jupiter in Gemini, so that might be how it works. Another person who likes to say stuff is Dmitry Medvedev. So Dmitry Medvedev he was Russian president, and he sort of alternated with Vladimir Putin, but now he's the bad cop to Vladimir Putin, the good cop. So in terms of the Ukraine, I mean, I know that Putin has a reputation for being in the West as being some kind of monster. But actually, if you look at Putin from a Russian perspective, he always comes over as being quite reasonable and moderate, and he's very careful what he said. Of course, he's actually been criticized a lot in Russia for the way for being so half-hearted in his attack on Ukraine in 2022, that he should have gone in, much more strongly, that he was naive, that's his approach, and him sort of being reluctant to attack civilian infrastructure. I know from the West it would be a different view, but there is a view that he's the kind of a good cop, and the bad cop is Dmitry Medvedev. And Dmitry Medvedev, he has his Jupiter at 2920 Gemini, and he has a Telegram channel, and Dmitry Medvedev, who is a very influential person in Russia, and he just comes up with really extreme comments. He's very insulting comments about the West, basically taking the view that, just bomb the bastards. And that's Jupiter in Gemini. And he needs to speak. He needs to say a lot, and his stuff doesn't sound very reasonable. And though I suppose he is making Vladimir Putin sound reasonable. So those are a few people with the moon with Jupiter in Gemini. Let's finish with Steve McQueen. People have been talking about Steve McQueen quite a lot recently. So Steve McQueen has Jupiter in Gemini. Now, with Jupiter in Gemini, of course, he had this high octane lifestyle, and maybe, I think for him, when he became an actor, it was just easy. He was just doing what he wanted to do. I suppose driving fast cars, motorbikes, or the current Bullet, and all of that kind of stuff. It was very much what he wanted to do. So I think he felt that he was paid for enjoying himself, and perhaps that's his Jupiter in Gemini. But maybe the Jupiter in Gemini may have something to do, in his case, describe how he died, because he died. Jupiter is ruler of his sixth house. Now, as I understand it, he died as a result of working in a ship. He was working in a ship and working with asbestos, and he inhaled asbestos while working as in a boat, and he eventually died, I believe, of asbestos-related lung cancer. And so you could see Jupiter in Gemini as actually describing how he died, because Jupiter's ruling the sixth. So Gemini is the lungs, and Jupiter is Jupiter. Jupiter is about things spreading. So you could actually associate Jupiter with Cancer, and cancer spreading, and Jupiter in Gemini, lung cancer, and Jupiter is ruler of the sixth. So that is one way in which Jupiter in Gemini could work, and it certainly describes Steve McQueen's, perhaps his personality as well. Jupiter in Gemini, looking for action and variety, but it could also have described how he died. So those are a few thoughts on people with Jupiter in Gemini. When I've described these people with Jupiter in Gemini, I don't feel that I sounded very convincing. I don't think that what I said about RFK sounded particularly effective. But I think the problem with Jupiter in Gemini is that it is not a personal planet. It's easier to talk about Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars. When you're talking about Jupiter in Gemini, you are describing people who are born, often in a particular year. As I said, it's people in your class at school. They all probably had Jupiter in the same sign. And so personalizing Jupiter in Gemini, it's difficult to personalize any planet because you've got to consider the whole chart in general. But dealing with a planet with Jupiter in Gemini, it's something more about a microgeneration rather than individuals. But I thought I'd have a go at looking at some people with Jupiter in Gemini. I don't think the exercise was particularly successful. I think it's just perhaps more important to think about what happens to the world when Jupiter does move into Gemini. And I just do have this concern that what was happening to the world at the beginning of the 20th century with Jupiter in Gemini may be starting to repeat itself now, as Jupiter is now about to move into Gemini at the end of a week. So anyway, that's all I've got to say about Jupiter and Gemini. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy the video, I would be very grateful if you were to like this video. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.